So I go to this dinner, never met before him and nobody else. We do the dinner. After the dinner, he takes me aside and I said, look, I need somebody to stay here in Shanghai for 6 months. I walked in and said, Jerry, Heinz is in every continent in the world except Africa. And Jerry, being an amazing entrepreneur, said, oh yes, why don't you take my plane and we go down to check it out. We start from the risk and say, okay, to do this deal, this is the risk. Now, what is the appropriate IRR to compensate, to mitigate, to match that risk? One of the things that really excites me about this program is that we have a very wide mandate of what we can do. So this wide mandate is very exciting, and I think is why the ambition of 25,000 beds is so high. If I have to give an advice, never burn bridges, no matter how ugly it gets, because it's going to come back and bite you.
Carlo, welcome to the People Property Place podcast.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here today.
Not at all. Well, look, you've had a fascinating background and career, and I know you're embarking on one of the biggest moves and projects of your professional career. And I'm really excited to kind of unpack Nido a little bit later in our conversation. But before we get onto there, can you rewind the clock and just tell me a little bit about how and why you got into real estate in the first instance?
Well, it all started with the school, right? You make some interesting decisions early on, and that somehow define the rest of your life. So I decided to study architecture because I was really interested in designing buildings.
Yeah.
And once I finished school, I found myself in Italy. That was in 1994, without a job, with the economic crisis and very low prospect of finding a job. And so I thought, well, I need to do something here. And so I started calling one architect in Turin, in my hometown in Italy, that I knew was active in Shanghai, China. And of course, as it happens, I was a young kid with no power, and this guy was a very important Italian architect. So there was no way I could get through him. But I called so many times that his PA, we became friendly. And one day I said, no, she said, no, Mr. He's not around. And he went to Shanghai. And I convinced her to give me the hotel address of the hotel in Shanghai. I bought a one-way ticket. I flew to Shanghai. And I called him up in the hotel. And then when you're there, you call, the dynamic changes, right? He's in an hotel. There's no the business surrounding him. And so he picks up the phone and say, oh, yes, you know what? Why don't you come tonight? We have a business dinner with some, Chinese officials, and then we can talk. And so I go to this dinner, never met before him and nobody else. We do the dinner. After the dinner, he takes me aside and I said, look, I need somebody to stay here in Shanghai for 6 months to really have the relationship with the counterpart. Because his idea was to build what he called the Italian center. There was like 90,000 square meter tower in Pudong, which is now full of skyscrapers. Back then was nothing. And I immediately said yes. And so he said, give me a budget of what you need. I gave him a budget. As being a young kid, the budget was like 30% of what it should have been. And 6 months led to 1 year. And then one thing led to another. And I thought, okay, this is a very interesting part of the world.
So let me just stop you there.
Yeah.
So did you graduate?
Yeah, I did.
So you graduated in architecture.
Yeah.
Couldn't get a job locally in Italy, but you had a lot of admiration for a very, very famous Italian architect who you'd tried to get in contact numerous times because you wanted to work presumably for him or for his business, but you couldn't get through to him. Because you were so persistent, you built a relationship with his PA and worked out at one particular moment in time that he was on business in Shanghai.
That's correct.
You got the name of the hotel where he was staying and booked a one-way flight. Presumably, having kind of graduated from university, you didn't have big resources, but you just took that as your opportunity to get in front of him. And your thought was what? If I can get in front of this guy,
I can win him over.
Yeah.
I was, very arrogant young kid, but I thought if I can talk to him, I can convince him that I can offer something. And then also it's about opening up, if opportunities are like an onion, you need to peel the skins. And every time you peel a piece of the skin, a new perspective opens, a new opportunity opens. And this is something I follow all my life. And so my interest wasn't, he was a good architect, but my interest was to get out of the Europe, get out of Italy, because I knew that, this was back in the days, probably you're too young to remember, but this was the famous era of the Asian tigers. So there was huge economic growth. There were huge, China was just coming out of communism. Vietnam and other countries in the Southeast Asia were just starting to develop. And so the opportunity was endless, and I wanted to be part of it.
And you figured if you stayed in Italy, you'd be like just another one of the local Italians who wanted to get into architecture, and actually by physically going to Shanghai as a statement of intent, put you poles apart from someone else who spoke a good game but actually didn't action and follow it.
There is one interesting statistic in Italy. There are as many architects as what you call in English the people that paint the walls of the houses.
Painters and decorators.
Exactly. So it's very competitive. And I remember being in Shanghai and then when I stayed in Far East for a few years, calling my friends back home. And they were, in architectural practice designing bathrooms. And they've been designing bathrooms for maybe 5 years. And I didn't want to do that. I thought there was something better, more interesting. And for me, it was a ball. And I was very curious. I wanted to discover the world. And when I landed in Shanghai, I remember probably until I died, nobody spoke English. To the point that when you had to leave, you took a taxi, you had to have somebody at the hotel write the hotel name in Chinese, otherwise you would not be able to come back home. And when you meet another expat, another European or foreigner on the street, you would stop, cross the street, shake hands, and ask, "What are you doing here? Let's go for a beer." Because of course nobody spoke English. You didn't meet anybody, so it was really like interesting and intriguing. It was really like landing on the moon. It was very. I loved it.
Did you always want to get into real estate when you were growing up?
No, I wanted to get into architecture, and so I worked as an architect for the first 7 years of my career. My life was architecture. And then I came to the realization very quickly that I wasn't, to be very successful in architecture, you need to be excellent. And I thought, yeah, I can be a good architect, but I don't have probably the talent that others have, because it's a very difficult profession. And so at a certain point I said, well, and also it's very difficult to make any money. And so, and by money, I mean paying the bills, not becoming billionaires. And so at a certain point I decided I wanted to jump into the development side of things. And then, the rest is history.
What, as a kid growing up, what kind of kid were you?
I was quite serious, very studious. I was, going very well in school. Very early, I got into sport in rowing. So I rowed from the age of 13 to the age of 20, at very high level, a national level. And so that was my life. Was training every day. When school was not there, twice a day. I was in a boat of 4. So that became my second family, because you really form bonds. And I think getting early in a sport teaches you so many lessons about teamwork, about defeat, about how to, overcome obstacles, how to interact with people. So it's really interesting. And it's something I'm trying to push my son, who is 13, to get into any sport, team sport, because it's really a school life.
Teaches you discipline and application. And so I guess that very regimented schooling career and then sporting career, meant you just had to be very, very efficient.
Yeah, and then, naturally, if you do that, you stay away from, smoking bad stuff or drinking too much. Not that I haven't done that later in life, but at least at the very early age when you're more vulnerable, you have a very good reason to say no to stuff. Because I'm training, I have a race next week, I cannot do that, I cannot do this. So for me, it worked very well for me.
So you spent 7 years in architecture, nearly 2 years in Shanghai?
No, I spent 1 year in Shanghai, then I moved then I spent 2 years in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. And this is another interesting story, because one of my best friends was working in Kuala Lumpur, which back then was the city in the world where they were building the highest number of square meters of office building. And was working in one of the best firms there, and said, well, you need to come here. There's a lot to do. It's very interesting, etc. So I applied. I sent my resume, my resume to this guy. I can say the name. His name is Ken Young. He's one of the largest firm there. And he straight out rejected me. So I used the same technique. I bought a one-way ticket. I went to Kuala Lumpur. I called him up and I said, well, I'm in Kuala Lumpur on business. Can I come and see you?
You weren't there on business. You were
Of
just
course
there to
not.
see
I was there on a budget, sleeping on the floor at some friend's house, living out the luggage. And coincidentally, he was doing a very big competitions. Architects do a lot of competitions. And he needed people, he needed hands. So he said, yeah, come and see me. So I went to see him. And I remember the interview lasted like 15 minutes. So I wasn't interested in anything. He just wanted another pair of hands and say, yeah. Can you start tomorrow? I say, yes, I can start tomorrow.
You're 6'5", ex-national rower. You can come and help me lift some stuff.
Exactly. And so I stayed there 2 years. And that was also very interesting.
So that initial meeting you managed to flip into
Yeah.
to a
And
job
then
as well.
the next day I went, and I remember for the first 4 days, because as an architect on competition, you work night and day. So we were working until 4 a.m., sleeping 3 hours per night. I was sleeping on the floor in some friend's house because I didn't have a house. I didn't have anything. I didn't have time to look for a house or a mattress or nothing. And then after these 4 days, he took all the team for drinks in this beautiful hotel by the pool, etc. And I remember drinking a lot of margaritas, and I said, okay, this feels good. I want to stay here. And so I stayed 2 years and worked in the firm for 2 years.
Wow, there's a recurring theme already in this early conversation we're having. So talk to me about how you decided to pivot away. Oh, sorry, I should say, you went to Vietnam after that, right? For nearly 3 years?
For 2 years, yeah. That is another interesting story. In Kuala Lumpur, I met my future business partner in Vietnam. There was a very talented designer from New York. He was kind of my boss in the Kuala Lumpur firm. And after 2 years, young, arrogant, ambitious kids, we said, okay, we can do this, but let's not do it here. Let's go to Saigon, Vietnam, and start there. So we flew to Saigon, Vietnam, not knowing anybody. And I remember my hand luggage back then was the screen of a computer, because we were moving with it. Now, back then the screen were like, big boxes. And we started from nothing. And we set up a firm that was doing mostly space planning, project management for large corporations that were setting up offices in Saigon. So we would take a space in the building completely empty. We would do the space planning, the layout, the design, and then project manage the fit out. And we were very successful, because at a certain point we were like 10, 15 people in Saigon, and we opened an office in Hanoi, and we did a lot of that for 2 years.
What was the realization where you thought, I don't want to be an architect anymore. I want to get more into the development side and start controlling some of these projects a little bit more closely?
Well, two things. Number one, I think if you work as an architect, at a certain point you realize that most of what you do is management, is design management, is project management. And this maybe in any project you do 85% of that, and then 10% of creativity and 5% administration. And I realized I had zero training in management. So we were doing disasters in terms of financials, accounting for our own firm. We were just not interested. And so I said, I need that training. And also, what they teach you in architectural school is that you control the project, which is not true. The project is controlled by the developer. The architect sees a little piece during the design. So the architect sees maybe 2 years. The developer sees a year or two before, and a year or two after, because he needs to do the commercialization. And so I was eager to see that, because I was interacting with developers, and I started thinking the other side of the table. And I thought, okay, this is interesting. I want to learn that. And third, as I said earlier, it's very difficult to make money unless you're at the top architects, or unless you do very average commercial work. Is difficult. And so I decided, I had a fantastic run. Now it's time to move on and do something different.
So did you go back to school?
Yes, I went back to school. I thought that, if you want to learn about management, you go to management school. And what is the better place than US to learn business? They are obsessed with business. And so I went to, out of all places, in Austin, Texas, University of Texas, study MBA for 2 years. And then at the end of so during the MBA, I was hired. In the 2 years MBA, you do a sandwich internship of 4 months. I was hired by Bank of America. So I moved to Charlotte for 5 months, working in the bank. And I got out from that experience thinking I will never, ever work in a bank again.
Go from an architect
this is
in
too
Vietnam
much.
to working in a high-pressure US bank.
But it wasn't even architect because it wasn't investment banking or anything. It was consumer mortgages arm. So it was something different. But it's just the I don't know, the mentality, the culture. I'm not saying it's wrong. It wasn't just for me. It was a little bit too corporate. So after that, I remember I graduated in 2002. And in 2001, again, financial crisis, downturns, what do we do? Very difficult to find a job. So I start going, I remember calling all the real estate developers in the region. And I also called the company whose headquarters are in Houston, Texas, called Hines, which turns out to be one of the largest developer in the world. I called them. I managed to get an interview with, I can't remember, the HR person. They said, look, here the crisis is very bad. We're not hiring here. But I heard that Heinz Milan is looking at the big project. So maybe your best bet is actually to call them. And so I did.
One-way flight?
No.
Not yet.
You still know. So I did, and again, coincidentally, this is what I'm saying. You need to chase opportunities. Luck is a big component of success in life, or whatever you do. I would say 80% is luck, but you need to put yourself in the position to benefit for the luck. So coincidentally, Heinz was about to start one of the largest mixed-use scheme in Italy, or 2 billion investment. And so they were very interested in getting MBAs with that kind of background, who spoke Italian, who were Italian, to be able to go to Milan and help. And so anyway, did a couple of interviews. They sent me to London after graduation. I went to London for a year to do a kind of a rotation program. And then in 2003, I went down to Milano and started working on this amazing project.
And that was your first taste of being a development manager, delivering a big scheme as part of a team.
Oh yeah, it was, and it's funny because my first title at Heinz was analyst. So, and I did the MBA quite late in life. So this job came late in life. I was probably 34, 35. And my first title was analyst. But I didn't care because, I was learning every day with everything. And, also what is very important, having the right mentor. There was a gentleman called Jay Wiper that was an American guy, typical Heinz, long tenure, has been in the company for 30, 40 years. And he was kind of the babysitter of us younger Italian people working on the project. And so from him and from Michael Topham, which was the head of Europe, I learned everything I know now about real estate. So these were the two really catalysts of the passion and the learning and the skills that I developed and I used to do the next moves.
I think it's a fascinating revelation because I think people will listen to this and they think they meant to have their life organized and sorted out by the age of 24. And here you are saying, having had an amazing experience over in the Far East, but kind of coming back to a realization and starting, again at 34 years old, and kind of being able to fast forward, and we'll obviously cover that in terms of the next leg of the story, to kind of be leading and being the CEO of Nido right now. It's phenomenal.
Well, it's phenomenal. I think it depends on who you are. For me, phenomenal would have been staying in Torino. So I remember going back to Torino, see my friends that never moved. For me, that was brave because I was completely out of what I wanted to do. I could see the value, but it wasn't me. For me, doing what I did was normal. But if you think about the resume, right? When I hired somebody, not anymore, but back in the days where I was maybe I did a lower level, I was looking maybe at 100 resume. You need to find something that sticks out. Otherwise, you're just exactly like the other 100. And yes, my background was very unusual. Vietnam, architect, Malaysia, etc., but it stuck out. So people would get me in the meeting, maybe just to hear the story, or just to check whether the story was true, or I don't know what. But anyway, was something different. And for a company like Heinz, having an architect, so very knowledgeable about the product, brick and mortars, with the MBA finance education, was very powerful.
And the language.
And the language for Italy.
Yeah.
And I found that at Heinz there were a lot of people with my background, architect with an MBA.
You ended up becoming a fund manager at Heinz. Talk to me about your kind of journey with the business.
I need to give a lot of credit for Heinz and Michael Topham, especially taking the risk. Because again, when I was put on the Porta Nuova project in Milan, I didn't know anything. So I really was learning as we go, and I own everything to the mentors and the team, because you learn. Yeah, maybe you are smart, you have transferable skills, you connect the dots, but you haven't done it 10 times before. And then after 4 years in Milan, I said to Michael, look, I want to change. I want to learn about the money, because real estate is a capital intensive. So in Milan, I learned how to deploy the money, or I thought I learned how to deploy the money. Now I want to know how the money thinks. So I want to go on the fund side. And he said, well, give me another year, and then we think about it. Anyway, we came true to his word. He said, why don't you come to London, and you can manage one of our funds that was doing, second home residential development in Spain. And then after that, he gave me also the Heinz European Development Fund, number 2. That was developing office building, funding office building across Europe. That again was a completely new experience. I had to learn everything. But if you are eager to learn, then it becomes fun, and everything that is fun, you become good at it. And I did that for 5 years, until the big crisis in 2008.
So talk to me about that crisis then.
So that crisis, was a big thing. And when you are sitting in London deploying capital in development, things are getting very boring very fast. So we were not deploying anything. So all you do is just, quarterly update to investors. There was nothing new. I was very bored. So I walked into Jerry Heinz, Mr. Heinz office. He was based in London, so I had the office a few doors down the mine. I walked in and said, Jerry, Heinz is in every continent in the world except Africa. And, I think there is opportunity. And these were the times where Africa, there were a lot of hope in Africa. Everybody thought Africa would be the next China. And I've seen what happened in China, in Vietnam, in Malaysia 15 years earlier. I thought, here's China number 2. I want to be part of it. And Jerry, an amazing entrepreneur, said, oh yes, why don't you take my plane and we go down to check it out? And back then it was 82.
He was 82?
He was 82 back then. So we flew to Lagos, Nigeria, Jerry, myself. On his private jet with Michael Topham. And I organized, because I've been there before a couple of times, I organized meetings. We also met the king of Lagos. It was an amazing experience. And we came back and he said, look, why don't we try for a year? We give you a mandate, you change job. For a year, you try to find something in Africa to do. But at the beginning, we don't want to deploy capital. We just want to do what we call them fee jobs. So selling expertise, selling development management, asset management expertise. And then we see how it goes. It was a typical Heinz strategy to come with expertise. Once you learn the lay of the ground, then you bring equity, your own family money, and then partners, etc. So I did that for a while, and back then I remember he was quite excited, but his son, the CEO of Heinz from Houston, he was calling me and said, "Look, why do you want to do Nigeria? It's very difficult. It's not safe, etc., etc." So after, let's say, after 9 months, they decide to pull the plug. However, in these 9 months, I was going down maybe once a month, Ghana, Nigeria, try to find opportunities. I cross path with the UK-based private equity group called Actis. There was a spin-off of the Commonwealth Development Corporation, so-called that back then. And they had an Africa real estate fund, the only one. Nobody else was there doing that. And so I started negotiating the deal before Heinz pulled the plug, whereby Heinz would open an office in West Africa with me, and would offer development services and property management services, and Actis would have provided the equity. When Heinz pulled the plug, the head of Actis Real Estate asked me, well, I understand that, I went to break the news. They was very not embarrassed, but, and they said, well, if you want, we can back you up. You move to West Africa, setting up a development company that we back, and we provide the equity to do development. It has to be like Class A commercial development in Ghana and Nigeria. And for me, it was like music to my ears. I said, fantastic. And so I got married I remember I got married in September 2009. And by January 2010, we moved to Ghana, to Accra, Ghana, and I started the company. And there was another 7 years of a lot of fun.
Talk to me about that journey, building a business, emerging market in
This is not
Africa?
Emerging market, this is frontier market. Look, it was very exciting, very stressful because you have all sorts of problems. You can imagine, very lack of talent, lack of skills on the ground, amazing people, amazing places. So I had a lot of fun, but it's not been plain sailing from the beginning. We managed to develop one office building in Accra. It was 20,000 square meters. By the way, it was the first quote-unquote green building in Ghana, green development in Ghana. One office building in Lagos, Nigeria, another 20,000 square meters. A shopping center in Abuja, 35,000 square meters. Abuja is the capital of Nigeria. And then after 7 years, I said, okay, enough of this. It was very fun. We had our son back then was like, when we moved was, I think 2 or 3. And when we actually, the trigger for the decision to move was, I don't know if you remember, Ebola.
Yeah.
So we were in the middle of it. And when you have a young kid and the family, and Ebola is 95% mortality rate, you start thinking, see things a little bit in different perspective. And so we said, okay, I think for education purposes, the Ebola problem, let's just change, go back to, let's change country.
So you left that business that you set up. How big was your team?
So the team was, we had an office in Accra with maybe 20, 25, so small, 20, 25 people. And then we have an office in Lagos with 5 or 6 people, and a small site office in Abuja with 2 or 3 people. So it wasn't very big. We developed all in all $500 million of assets. But the complication and the hurdles of developing a building there, I could write a book because every day was something different. I had a lot of fun, but wasn't always plain sailing. There are a lot of sleepless nights and challenges. But
you came back to the UK, did you? Or
no, I went to New York. We moved to New York, and I started working for a asset management / development management company in German with a program for US. So we were developing high-end residential in Manhattan and Miami. And I did that for 2 years. And then what happened is I was living on the Upper East Side in New York. My son was 4 at the time, 5, and he was doing soccer classes on Sunday. And as all the other dads, I was sitting in this audience outside in the freezing cold of New York, sitting outside watching these kids playing. And there was this very nice guy, another father, obviously, and we started chatting. And for the first 3 months, we never talk about business, just personal stuff here, this and that. And then after 3 months, he comes to me and says, you know what, I'm changing job. I'm taking a job with a firm in Chicago. I'm moving to New Jersey, but it was very nice meeting you. Let's keep in touch. I say, yeah, of course, we keep in touch. Of course, never kept in touch. After 6 or 9 months, he calls me out of the blue and he says, look, as I told you, I changed job. I joined this company that is one of the largest student housing development and management company in the US. We want to expand in Europe. Do you know anybody that can help us? And I said, yeah, I know somebody. Because back then with my wife, we wanted to come back to Europe. And so I said, yeah, I would love to hear more about the opportunity.
And he was asking you because he obviously knew you're Italian and
it's the code question for say, are you by any chance interested? Yep. And I said, yeah. So he flew me to Chicago. I met the CEO, I met the team, and they said, yeah, let's do it. And so in July 2018, I moved back to London, and I set up the platform for CA Ventures in London, and we started the European business.
Property is a people business, hence the name People Property Place. Business has been tough the last couple of years. Get the people aspect wrong, business becomes impossible. Get the people aspect right, it's still hard, but it's manageable, much more enjoyable, and you're much more likely to hit your goals. So if you're looking to add top talent to your team in 2025 and you're open-minded to an alternative approach and you're keen to make business a little less hard, drop me a DM. I'd love to have a conversation with you to see how Rockborn could potentially help you with your human capital requirements. Right, let's get back to the podcast. So for someone listening to this who hasn't come across CA Ventures, can you just paint a bit of a picture of the business at the time in the US and then what the mandate was over here in the UK and Europe?
Yeah, so CA Venture was, as I said, one of the largest vertically integrated platform or company of student housing in the States. They were managing back then, I think, 30,000 beds. They had close to 15 billion under management, and they were the typical PE firm, let's say, where they would take a GP position, put in some money on the table, and then raise LP capital for maybe 90%. So they would put 10%, raise 90%, do a programmatic joint ventures to develop, pick a number, 3-4 sites. They would develop the site, and they would manage the asset. In student housing, it's very important that you have that component, and then they would sell it and start again. And so in Europe, the idea was to do exactly the same, but to leverage the experience of managing 35,000 beds in US for 20 years. And, student housing in Europe was and is still a very new asset class. UK is quite advanced compared to the rest of Europe, but 7 years ago was even UK was far behind US. So there was a lot of lessons learned we brought in, and so we set up the firm in London. We had an office in Milan, so we were doing Italy, an office in Barcelona for Iberia, and we developed 5,000 beds in 5 years. We managed for third parties another 2,000 beds scattered around Spain, Ireland, and UK. And we were. If you look at the student housing, it started like mono product, and then
what product? Sorry,
mono product, one product,
yeah.
Student housing.
Yeah.
And then as the market became more sophisticated, it started segmenting like hotels. So now you have anything between the Holiday Inn to the Four Seasons. And just to give you a reference, we were close to the Four Seasons type of services.
In terms of like the amenities.
The amenities, the quality of the rooms, the service was really like the highest end. We were the first, as far as I know, still the only one. We had a dishwasher, washer and dryer in every studio, in every room. Because, this was the product, the differentiating factor.
So you built the platform from scratch, and they'd given you what, just some pursuit capital, or
Yeah,
just some money to kind of get
there was the pursuit capital. I had to say, the Tom Scott was the CEO from Chicago, and John Diedrich was kind of the person that was flying back and forth on a regular basis. Very brave, very to-do attitude, typical American. There's no obstacle that is unsurmountable. So I learned that from them. Huge ambitions, also something that I learned. In Europe, we tend to have a little bit less this ambitious view. And so they brought a lot of capital to set up the firm, pursuit capital and GP capital. And then we raised the LP capital on the back of it.
Was that raising the LP capital from the existing relationships in the US and bringing them with you, or was that a kind of a task that you had in terms of expanding that LP base over here in the UK and Europe
So it was a bit of the two. What helped obviously was the track record. They had an amazing track record in the US with huge returns on the portfolio. Relationships, they had programmatic joint venture with Goldman Sachs, Quadrille, PGIM, you name it. Harrison Street was a big partners of that. So some of those relationships, we leveraged those here. And on the back of that, we went to knock on new doors and said, look, we're working with these investors in US and here in Europe. Are you interested in doing other, programmatic joint ventures? And so one thing led to another.
So you set up London office and also some in Italy and Spain.
Spain and Italy were very small. So in Italy, we had 2 people. And in Spain, we had two or three. Was mainly for originating deals and follow the development once the development was coming up. The idea was to grow the team organically with the pipeline, but then the pipeline never really grew past a certain point.
How many heads were you in London?
Sorry?
How many heads were you in London?
In London, we had at the peak we had like 50 people. We had again, the model was vertically integrated, which is extremely important in student housing because the property management, marketing and leasing, the ops side of it is the key. Is really where the rubber hits the road, and is also the function that feeds back on the investment underwriting. So you are sure that the way you underwrite the deal and the way you program the building is then leasable and can be operated.
Because you're getting live
because you get feedback from the team, right?
Based on the team in terms of the realities. So when you plug in your assumptions into your underwrite, you can be very accurate in terms of
not only that, but every opportunity the ops team would walk the market, go down. I don't know. We had an opportunity pick a city, Florence. The ops team would fly from London to Florence, talk to university, talk to student, see every other competitor's asset, come back and say, okay, these are the rent, these are the square meters of amenities, these are the type of amenities we think will work there. So there was really like a lot of work, and if you don't have the piece, it's very difficult because you're kind of shooting in the dark. You're developing a building, but then at what rent, and are you sure you can operate the building?
You're with CA Ventures for nearly 6 years.
Yes.
What can you say about the kind of the conclusion of that?
Well, look, it's unfortunately they huge ambitions. Probably they made some faux pas in the States. Financing dried up, and the whole company suffered, including the European arm. So at a certain point, I saw the writing in the wall, and I thought that the best course of action for me was to change course. I stayed very good relationship. This is something I did all my career, and if I have to give an advice, never burn bridges, no matter how ugly it gets, because it's going to come back and bite you. So I kept very good relationship with the CA Venture people, ex-colleague and boss, etc., and I moved on.
Was it a case of waiting for the next opportunity and biding your time, or how quickly did Nido come around?
Nido came around quite fast, and I was set to change no matter what. And coincidentally, when I made that decision, completely coincidentally, unrelated, when I had Hunter called and started asking me, if I was interested, and so I said, yeah, he's absolutely interested. And 8 or 9 months later, I started this adventure.
Nido is one of the first, if I'm not mistaken, kind of institutional grade student platforms that was set up and launched. Is that right? Starting back in 2007, or
Well, so
prior to Roundhill's acquisition?
Yeah, it's a bit. There were many institutional grade platforms, including CA Venture. You can argue there was institutional because the money that was backing the development were hyper institutional, Goldman Sachs, and so Roundhill and Nido were competitors of CA Ventures and Novell. That was our brand when I was at CA Ventures. Nido has started before CA Ventures. They started 10 years ago. They had a very nice ramp up, very good brand. They expanded all over Europe, in UK, of course, but in Germany and Spain. And then I believe 4 years ago, they decided to do a joint venture with CPPIB, or maybe the other way around. CPPIB decided to do a joint venture with them, and they developed this portfolio in Iberia, Portugal, and Spain that we inherited when they came over. If you fast forward, CPPIB decided to buy Roundhill Capital out of the asset, and also decided to buy the management company and team and brand linked to this asset to make sure that there was continuity.
As well as the third-party mandates and money that they managed on behalf
because
of other
the strategy with original Nido was to manage their own assets, so Roundhill with the partners asset, but also to offer property management, marketing, and leasing services to third parties investors. This is the reason why we had 3 assets in Ireland, 1 asset in Denmark, but we are slowly cutting that unless it's for unless there are very strategic reasons for us to do third-party management, like new market where we want to enter, like Italy or Germany. We would do that. We would do third-party management, or UK, because UK is one of the most sophisticated market in the world. I think having a small foothold here makes sense strategically because there is a lot of learning, a lot of business happening in this country, and so makes sense. But otherwise, we won't do third-party random.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess it's also part of that Heinz model in terms of start off third-party fee-basis management, get the data, get the information
Yes,
before you start bringing your own expertise and then wider capital to it.
Well,
right?
it's a win-win situation, right? If I offer Nido expertise in Italy, the investor that buys our services, of course, they buy expertise, they buy skills, they buy track record in management. And we go to school a little bit on them because we learn the ground and what's happening on the ground. So it's a win-win situation that I think can be interesting, but otherwise it doesn't make sense.
So it's a case of rationalizing the portfolio, but CPP buying out the management company and having more of a control over the direction or the growth of the wider portfolio.
But it was that, and also their master plan, the grand plan was to grow the portfolio from 5,000 beds, roughly $500 million, to 25,000 beds and $3 billion in 7 years, adding Germany and Italy, and keep on going in Iberia. So huge ambitions. And of course, the Nido platform was like the bedrock of the growth. But then the idea was to add all the functions you needed to fuel the growth.
So they had the kind of the infrastructure or the initial platform. It was just then a case of expanding it further. And where did taking $500 million to $3 billion and 7 years, was it just in the air, or how do you get to those kind of numbers? Well,
you look at the markets, you look at what you can do. If you look at the supply-demand imbalances in a country like Germany and Italy, is phenomenal. So I learned from CA Venture that the biggest hurdle is actually finding capital. And when you have a business model like CA Venture or Roundhill Capital, the problem is that you have the pipeline, but you don't have the capital. Or if you have a fund, you have the money, but you don't have the pipeline. And then when you close a deal, you need to line up the equity, the debt, the building permit, and so it becomes very complicated. And that is a huge drag into creating pipeline. And so if you can take out that hurdle and have a true and real institutional platform, you can widen the ambitions. And the idea of doing 10,000 beds per country is not crazy.
So what you're basically saying is by having the vertical integration and the capital in place with the ambitions, combined with the platform, you're able to remove some of the blockages, and it's just a case of being able to then actually get the money out of the door, and becomes a little bit more stock and site selection in terms of how you're going to deploy that.
That's the bet, coupled with the strong governance, because let's remember this is pension money, and we need to be extra careful. It's not some high net worth individual wanted to do some project. This is different ball game.
Where does data factor into your decision making of where and how you're going to deploy that capital, and into which city or geography?
Well, data is everything. So the decision making is not just here, what I'm doing now, but it's been what I was doing in the past. Is everything. And in real estate, data, understanding comps, rent, location, distance time from the universities, exit cap rates, stabilization velocity is key. And so you look around, you get all the data you want. We are going through a huge effort now internally to capture all this data, because we have a lot of data already because we're managing 5,000 beds, but we want to make sure that we capture every single aspect, the data of every single aspect of if you look at the value chain of development of one of these assets. So from looking at the opportunity to going through the investment process, to closing the deal, to design, programming the deal, develop the deal, build the building, and then operating it. So you can imagine how much data there is there that you can use and make it useful for the next round of deals.
And is it about buying existing assets and optimizing them, or refurbing existing Gen 1, 2, 3 type kit, or is it buying land and taking it through planning and building kind of bespoke developments with a Nido?
Yeah, is all of the above. So one of the things that really excites me about this program is that we have a very wide mandate of what we can do, and we can really navigate the risk spectrum up and down from acquiring existing operating asset, to forward funding, forward development. So working with local developers to help them fund the deal or buy the deal once they develop it, to buying land to develop ourselves. Going through M&A or buying large portfolios or companies. So this wide mandate is very exciting, and I think is why the ambition of 25,000 beds is so high, because very often you're constrained by certain hurdles. Like if you are like Roundhill Capital or CA Venture, you have a very high threshold for the IRR of the deal. And that completely limit the type of deals you can look at, that you can invest in. Here we can do a lot of things, which is very exciting.
Pension fund capital, I'm assuming lower cost of capital, and as you said, like flexible, so you can access the market, whether it's portfolio development, existing kind of repositions.
It's not really low cost of capital. It's just a different attitude towards the how you look at deals. So we are very focused on risk. And we're very focused on underwriting the risk, and then thinking, okay, what is the IRR, the return, that will justify taking the risk? So it's not that we kind of turn it in his head. It's not, we need to achieve 20% IRR, otherwise we cannot do the deal. And the risk is kind of an afterthought. We start from the risk and say, okay, to do this deal, this is the risk. Now, what is the appropriate IRR to compensate, to mitigate, to match that risk?
Which sounds really simple and straightforward, and how kind of real estate investing should be, right? But sometimes or somehow people just try and cram deals into a 5-7 year deployment window to hit an IRR. So I guess effectively, yeah, it makes sense. You can look at a deal and go, do we want to do it on what risk basis, and where does it fit into our wider portfolio and our plans in terms of how we are diversified and looking to build.
The private equity business is all about fees, right? So the more deals you do, the more fees you make, and so the incentives is clear. Here we don't have fees. We are all vertically integrated. There's one clear ownership, and my development team is not selling services; is just doing developing the deal. The investment team is not trying to cram investment through the throat of the investors to earn some fees. So it's a different motivation, different incentive, and different program.
You've been on a bit of a pan-European wide recruitment drive. Can you just talk to me about how you've approached that and what the rationale has been?
Pan-European?
Yeah.
Well, so pan-European because of course the platform will be pan-European, right? So we need to hire, everybody is a bit of a cliche, but real estate is really about being local. You need boots on the ground, and everybody that tried to do not only student housing but any other asset class remotely from London or US failed, because it's very simple. You need people on the ground, contacts, and the view from US very often is that Europe is a country, or a country with different states, but it's not. It's different countries with different languages, different legal system, different cultural norms, different way of doing business. And you need to recognize that and be respectful of that. And so you need local teams. So this is the reason why we hire international. We are based in Amsterdam. Netherlands is not the easiest market to find talent. And so sometimes we look at other nationality. It's not easy to find talent, but there's a huge pool of international talent in Netherlands. So in our office, we counted we are roughly 40, 50 people, and we counted maybe 10 different nationalities. Everybody's been living in Netherlands. Most of them they've been living in Netherlands for a long time, but they are from somewhere else.
Yeah. Talk to me about we touched on the kind of earlier, like the amenities and the dishwasher and dryer and the kind of the CA venture model as a point of differentiator. Is there still an amenities race, or what kind of product? Can you standardize a product for all markets? Or is it kind of quite localized still, and it's trying to work out the Nido kind of product market fit for each geography? Or can you kind of have a Nido brand across all geographies?
Well, so the brand, yes, can be the same. The product, the challenge, and we're trying to square the circle, is to localize, yet industrialize and standardize for scale, right? So if you need to get to 25,000 beds, you don't get there by having 25,000 different rooms. So you need to standardize. So we are doing a huge drive to, right now we have, pick a number, we have maybe 20, 30 different type of rooms in our portfolio. We want to shrink that to 6 and standardize as much as possible. But one of our strengths is that we have the ability to really localize. Because one thing you learn when you do student housing long enough is that it sounds like, the student in Paris is exactly the same as a student in London or a student in Milan to a certain extent. But localized granularly to the point of the individual locations is very important. And so we are pretty good at doing that. And so we really look at the market, the location, the micro location, and we try to adapt the offering to that. In terms of amenities, to answer your question, yes, there is still the race to do crazy amenities, but we decided to not follow the trend. So we are providing good amenities, but we don't go crazy with the bowling alley or karaoke room or the music studios. We provide things that are solid and needed, like study rooms. They're very important. It's the most popular, tend to be the most popular amenities in any building. And then we want to focus on the room, because we think that the room has been overlooked by the industry. If you look at these, if you go and see all the room in the industry, they tend to all look the same, and they all tend to look like a cheap hotel room. including ours so far. And that is fine. You know, cheap hotel room is fine if you stay 2-3 days, but if you need to stay 11, 12, 13 months is a lot to ask. So we're trying to rethink that and come up with something that is cozy yet functional, and it doesn't have the touch and feel of a cheap hotel room.
Talk to me about kind of domestic versus international students. Have you got any data that you're seeing both in the UK but in those European markets, and how they are split or how they are made up?
Well, in UK, when we're doing stuff with CA Ventures, I would say north of 80% of our students were international, and 80% of the 80% were Chinese. So there was a huge focus on international student, and that justified aiming for a very high level product, because these kids come from homes that are, typically high end, high rise, and they have little tolerance for sharing greasy kitchens or moldy bathrooms. They want state of the art. They want their own dishwasher in the room. They want their own washer and dryer, because they don't want to share washing machines with other students. And so that was a very specific product for a very specific demographic. When you move to continental Europe, that is a different story. I would say that probably in our asset, maybe anything between 30 and 50% are international. The rest are local. There is more affordability becomes more of an issue, of a concern. So you need to design and program for that. But international students are becoming more and more important cohort. And if you look at what's happening in the States at the moment, it's not, it doesn't take much to imagine that a lot of the students will not decide to go and study, especially if you are Chinese or Middle Eastern, go and study in the US and divert to Europe. UK is very expensive in terms of tuition. So if you're a Chinese student or a Middle Eastern student, you pay 29,000 pounds tuition only. In most of European universities, which are public, they're virtually free. And so yes, it's not the same prestige or the same brand, but they are good university. You can have very good education at a fraction of the cost.
You have good Western education at a strong institution, and build a diverse network from that university with good prospects. We're going to do a good job off the back of it.
Yeah.
Without having to go to the US or the UK. Are rent controls or wider kind of localized political agendas a big concern?
Well, definitely rent control is something we keep an eye on. We are managing 3 assets in Ireland, and we are pulling out because of the rent control makes it very difficult. We're not going to invest any more money in Ireland. Netherlands has very strong rent controls. We have 2 assets there that we probably going to be exiting at a certain point. So it's something that we're looking at. But it was interesting, for example, of Ireland, is that the rent control were put on, and now there are talks about reconsidering, because there's not been any money coming into the country anymore for student housing. And so the rent control actually have the opposite effect of constraining supply, making whatever is there even more scarce, and students really sleep in tents in most of these markets. There is a huge supply-demand imbalance, so it should be exactly the opposite. And there is a little bit of this demonization of student housing as the developer making money on the back of students. And student housing should be affordable, should be low rent, but is a fallacy, because, as I said, there are students that want the high-end product, and students that cannot afford it or are not that interested, and they rent a different product. So, like in residential or in hotel, there is a room and a product for every pocket, and try to homogenize everything on the lower end of the spectrum, I think is wrong.
What are you most excited about right now?
Well, our expansion. I think is an amazing opportunity. And the other thing is exciting is that we managed to put together a team which really are pushing the same directions. If you talk to my team, everybody's excited about the same thing. This is a very ambitious program, and there's never been tried before. And this is the beauty of it, right? Is the pool, and everybody is at the same motivation, which is very important.
Carlo, you've had a phenomenal career. It has a few similar themes that kind of run through it. You know, getting on a one-way flight, backing yourself, and kind of engineering a conversation that leads to a job and an opportunity. But also staying incredibly curious and managing to find a way through a particular situation. As we draw to a close now, a question I ask everyone on the podcast is, if I gave you £500 million of the capital, how would you look to deploy that? I know you're going to say student and your team and the geographies that we've kind of touched on. I get the feeling that 500 million isn't going to cut it and isn't going to go particularly far. But if I take you away from that, how would you look to deploy that money?
Well, maybe 1% on that on a sailing boat, whatever is left. So if let's set aside student housing in Europe, because it's obvious. I think is probably one of the best opportunity at the moment. I'm still very intrigued by emerging markets, and nowadays I think Middle East, to be more precise, Saudi. I think is very interesting for a young professional that want to develop a career. Not only because what they're doing now, which is, I think it will be crazy, and of course there's going to be a certain point where reality kicks in and the project gets rein back. But I think the opportunity is amazing. I traveled, I did a couple of roadshows over there. I met the usual suspect, on the funding side of things. Professional, etc., is very exciting, and I think that if I had to invest my money, I would probably invest it there. If I was probably like 30 years younger. And
what property? What type of property there?
Well, I think student housing for once. I think they have a huge amount of students. They have 2 million students in the country, and they have in Riyadh. I think they have something like 300,000 students only in Riyadh, and zero student housing, not one bed. They have a little bit of dorms in the various universities. So there is, and Riyadh is attracting a lot of students of the Muslim world, because it's one of the best places where you want to do Muslim studies. And so that is, I think, is a good proposition. But there is a need to do anything. So, all asset classes is really like, I think the opportunity is endless there.
Well, look, maybe once you've realised your 25,000 bed European ambitions in the next 7 years, you'll look to replicate a small part of that success over in the Middle East. I
need to talk to my wife. I don't think she would agree to move again.
Yeah, to square the global circle, notwithstanding Australia and New Zealand. Maybe that's the last hurrah.
We're done. We're happy in Europe, I think, for the next foreseeable future.
You'll have to work on Mrs. Matta over the next few years to.
It's going to take more than work.
Well, look, Carlo, you've like I said earlier, you've had an absolutely incredible career. And you've taken on a massive project, so I'm really excited to see what you and the team go on to build and deliver over the next 5-6 years. So thank you so much for joining me.
No, thank you. Pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invite. Really appreciate it.
Hey, quick one from me. If you enjoyed this conversation, do me a favor and share it with a friend or colleague that you think would get value from this conversation. It would mean the world and help grow the People Property Place podcast. Thank you so much.